Welcome to Chapter 2, Lesson 4, where we learn how to create colors and gradients. So the file that you're going to need to have open is your Berry Symposium file, where in our last lesson we added the text on a path around an ellipse in our image. So the first thing I want you guys to do is use your selection tool and click on our first set of text. So we're going to go to Object, then we're going to select Lock and Selection. Then we're going to select our second item of text. We're going to do the same thing where we go to Object, Lock, and Selection. And then we want to make sure that if you did not lock your diamond in the last video or 2 videos ago, that you haven't locked now, so that all of these items are locked so that we cannot alter them as we're working on our gradient. So the first step is going to be to create a 4-inch circle in the center of our image. So as you remember from last time, we want to go to our ellipse tool, and then we want to hold down the Alt key, find our center point, and click once in the middle. So it'll bring up that dialog box, but it'll also center our new ellipse around that dialog box, or around that center. So the width is going to be 4 and the height is going to be 4. We're going to hit OK, and we're going to have a box pop up, or circle pop up that is black. I want you guys to just click on one of the swatches to see how it'll change the fill when our fill function, or fill tool, is active. So what we want to do now is we are going to select the Rainbow Blend gradient in our Swatches tab, and it's going to turn our circle into a rainbow gradient. So to be able to adjust our gradient, we have to open our gradient panel, which we don't see it right now, so we're going to go to Window, and then find our gradient option and show it. What we want to do is, if you don't see all these options currently, you're going to come here and you're going to click on Show Options. Ours says Hide Options because we see everything right now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the gradient stops. So these are our gradient stops. They're called gradient sliders or gradient stops. We can either add gradient stops or sliders, or we can get rid of them. To get rid of them, we're going to click on it and then just drag down and release. So let's go ahead and delete all of the gradient stops or sliders except for the first one and the last one. And this is what our image should look like for now. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can add a gradient slider back in. So we need to make our selection tool active. Come over here to our gradient until you see the mouse change. See how it has the different mouse style and then the plus side? If we click, once we have that, we can add in a gradient stop again. So what I want you guys to do is add this one in and then change that location to 50. So it's saying I want this change in color to be 50% of the way through the gradient. So what we're going to do next is we are going to change the color of our sliders. And the way we do that is by hitting Alt, clicking on our gradient stop, and then coming to the swatches. So what we want to do is change our middle one to a squash color. And we're just going to click. And you'll notice now that our middle gradient with that little squash color in the middle is altered. So next we are going to change our first swatch by clicking on it, hitting Alt, and then we're going to change it to black. Then we're going to do the same thing with our far right swatch. Click on it, hit the Alt key, and select our black swatch. And you should get something that looks very similar to this. Next, what I want you guys to do is take your diamond sliders, which will be found on the top, which determines when it starts to fade to the next color in between each stop. And we're going to drag this to 50%, or approximately 50%. And then we're also going to drag this one to approximately 50%. So your image should very much resemble what is on my screen. So now we're going to learn how to change our color within our gradients on our gradient sliders by using a color dialog box. So if we double click on our center slider, what should happen is we should get a dialog box that appears with our different color options. So we're going to adjust these manually, and what we're going to do is 5 for our C, 95 for our M, 95 for our Y, and 3 for our K, which should give us more of a red color. And then we can click on our slider again, and that dialog box will disappear. So now what we're going to do is change the type of our gradient. So our type can be found right here, and right now we have linear, and our other option is radial, so it's going to come out from the middle of a circle. So we're going to go ahead and select radial so that we can see the difference in how this image looks. So what we're going to do now is take our diamond at the top of our gradient slider, the one that's in between the first two stops, and drag it to the location of 87%. So we're going to drag it all the way over until we get a location of 87%, and that's really going to change the look of our gradient. So what we're going to do now is add an additional shape over our current gradient to really give it an artistic or aesthetically pleasing appeal. So what we want to do is we want to go to our scale tool, and our scale tool can be found right here by clicking on S or by clicking on the tool, but we're going to double click it to open a dialog box, and it's going to ask us how do we want to scale our new item. So we're going to put 65% for our scale, and then instead of changing our current item scale, what we're going to do is we're going to create a copy, and it should overlay our first ellipse. So we'll hit OK, and then making sure that we don't click anywhere else and having this small circle selected, we're going to go over to our gradient options, and we're going to change our first slider to a white color. So we can do that by double clicking and just hitting on the white, and then we are going to change our final slider by double clicking, and we're going to adjust our numbers with our C changing or staying at 0, our M being 40, our Y being 50, and our K being 0. Then what we're going to do is we are going to take our middle slider, click on it, drag down, and release to delete it. So we're going to get a much brighter gradient now in the center of our ellipse. Next, we're going to take our midpoint or our diamond, and we are going to position that to a 65%. Once we've done that, we're going to drag our gradient fill, which our gradient fill is going to be displayed as a preview in this far left-hand top side corner. And if we click on it and simply hold and then drag and release over to our swatches, you'll notice that a new swatch appears in our swatches panel. So we can rename the swatch so that we can use it again by double clicking, and we're going to rename this one Pinky. And then just hit OK, and now we have a new gradient created within our swatches panel. And now we're going to do the same thing and add a gradient for our larger ellipse by going to our selection tool, selecting our larger circle, and you'll notice now that the gradient image changes. We're going to click, hold down, and drag over, release in our swatches box, double click, and we are going to rename this one Crimson Gradient. And then hit OK. And that is all for Chapter 2, Lesson 4. The only thing you need to do for now is save your work so that you can use the same file in Lesson 5.